Welcome. I am Michele Leclaire, Executive Director of Buckham Gallery. Today, I am chatting with Gwen Montgomery about her exhibition Crawl Space on view through February 11. This exhibition may also be viewed on our website at buckhamgallery.org. Gwen Montgomery's installation, Crawl Space, explores the trait of trouble discarding rarely used possessions. Crawl Space is a neglected place where things are left and forgotten with the assumption that they will always be there, unchanging. Prints are made from fur and clothing, inked and printed on an etching press. Montgomery makes prints like this because it centers on touch, both the actual, literal, pressured touch of fur or fabric matrix paper, and the sense of longing to touch that comes from the printed illusion of fur or fabric. Touch is a key anchor to our bodies and the world, and is a reminder that we can't escape the material. Before we start the conversation, I would like to say thank you to our incredible audience, whether visiting the gallery in person or viewing these videos online, and to all the artists who submit to our exhibition calls. I appreciate you. Next, I would like to say a big thank you to all the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Fine Arts Project and Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Michigan Arts and Culture Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program, made possible by the Genesee County Arts and Education Cultural Enrichment Millage Fund. Your tax dollars at work. Thank you. Buckham Gallery is pleased to present the work of Gwen Montgomery and her solo exhibition, Crawl Space. Montgomery is an artist and performer whose work investigates identity through studies of gender, material culture, regional narrative, and family mythology. Materially, Montgomery's work is located in the intersections between printmaking, performance, and sculpture. Montgomery has exhibited nationally and internationally and has worked in multiple collections, including the Center for Art and Design in Churchill, Australia, also in Tokyo, Japan, with recent exhibitions in Nashville and St. Louis. Montgomery currently teaches in the Studio Arts program at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, where she lives with her wife, dog, and 2 cats. Welcome, Gwen. I am excited to have this opportunity to talk with you and learn more about you and your work that we are so excited to have the opportunity to share with our Flint audience. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much. I love that you're in the gallery with the show in the background. That's awesome.
Yeah, I really like, having it around. So sort of feeling in the space. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So I like to start these conversations by learning a little bit about you, sort of your background, where you're from, and what led you to the path of art making.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. My background is printmaking in terms of studio work. Where I'm located now is Illinois, and I teach at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Here I teach in the studio art program, and I teach some sculpture and printmaking. But I came to art making through, I think, just being a childhood weirdo. I think I just was always making things. I was always inventing things and making my own dolls that were just drawings on pieces of paper that I would play with, and animating everything in my life. And I went to school thinking I was going to do acting and theater, actually, in college. I did a lot of both art making and theater through high school. I was always a little bit torn between performing and visual arts. And yeah, I thought that I was going to go into acting, got involved in costume design, had a really influential costume design instructor who pointed out to me that what I really loved was the drawing and the crafting, that was a huge part of my interest in it. And I started to dabble in the art classes and realized that, for one thing, our acting was not fulfilling. Performance is fulfilling, but attempting to be a professional actor was not, I think, as good for my soul as art making. I got into the print studio. I was at the University of Hawaii at the time, had a really wonderful professor, and fell in with a printmaking crowd. And through the advising of these couple of professors, discovered, where I fit, this weird niche that I didn't know existed. And I think that a lot of that theater background, the love of character and mise en scene, props, scenery, it's really strongly in my work still.
Oh
Costume.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But now I have control over the whole kind of universe or world of the things, and I invent all parts of it, and that's the most satisfying to me. So yeah, that's kind of how I meandered over to art making and printmaking.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's always been part of your life then. It wasn't like a sudden change. There's a couple of things you said. I love that printmaking studios, especially in colleges, like the people involved in printmaking are always the best. I don't know what it just draws the people in. I
Mhm.
went to school thinking I was going to be just doing sculpture,
Mm.
and the print we I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and went for
Mm.
sculpture, and we ended up loving printmaking so much, and the people involved in like that community atmosphere where everyone is in the shop and working. And
Mhm.
I always I always love talking to the printmakers when I do these. I
Yeah.
mostly do painting now, but I still
Oh,
have
cool.
that, you know, love and draw to other printmakers.
Yeah, they're good people, right? They're kind of down to earth, and they know how to work in a community. They know how to handle like co-presence of a bunch of people in maybe a small space. They like
Mhm.
process, which there's something about that I think that unites people. There's a geekiness. Yeah, the print
Yeah.
people are good people. And honestly, one of the reasons that I was less into theater, the deeper I got into it, was theater people.
Oh.
I mean, I say that jokingly because I still kind of consider myself a theater person, but it's true. I mean, I think that there are different cultures, and the culture of print was definitely the one I wanted to be in.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
And then when you mentioned the costume design and like from as a childhood and drawing, I was like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense with what you've created in your
Yeah.
installations. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
get very far away from it, but yeah, it definitely is a huge part. And I'm really grateful for having that influence because I don't know, I mean, I get to be sort of fulfilled in all of these different ways that I took me a long time to figure out how to unite.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's almost like because of the installation work, you're not just making prints, you're not just making like the ceramics or whatever. It all comes together in this beautiful installation. It's almost like you've created your own um, stage set and performance, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I hope for, is to make an
Yeah.
installation that draws you in and makes you feel, if not totally immersive, that you kind of get to see inside my brain and see the stage set in there. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
definitely. Okay, so how does your title crawl space relate to this body of work?
Yeah, so crawl space titles are so hard.
Yeah.
It's either too on the nose or too abstract, and um, sometimes it's like, yeah, crawl space is one of those titles that just felt so right for this work. Sometimes you
Mhm.
title things and you're like, well, that'll do. This actually, I think, is one of the tightest fits for the work in the show and how I feel about it. And essentially, it's thinking about our animalness in relation to gender and domesticity. So, thinking about the home, the domestic space, the den or house, and then the spaces that are hidden, the places we stuff our objects that we don't know what to do with, or um, hide away bits and pieces of our lives that are maybe older or no longer in use. And then thinking about how a crawl space I mean, literally, there's the word crawl in it, which makes me think of this ambulation of like the creature behind you in
Yeah.
the installation there, and how you're forced over in those spaces. You're forced to bend and kind of crawl through them in this creature-like way, um, and that it would be something that maybe implies an underground layer or a level beneath everything else.
Mm.
So yeah, it's tying together these separate threads of possessions and home um, and memory objects or loaded objects, and then this relationship between those things and our human animal selves.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
also crawl space, you can imagine if things like slip through the cracks or to go through the floor, that's where they're going to end up, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
collecting in that
exactly.
space.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's also kind of like the subconscious. You could think of it as a
Mm.
different kind of mental space or consciousness. Um, yeah, I think it works as a nice metaphor with often the house is used as a metaphor for the body or the person, and the crawl space being kind of below the basement or neglected area where we maybe hide things or neglect to think about things.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's awesome. So your artist statement mentions the 23andMe results of being 81% more Neanderthal than other customers. And I'm like, why is that important to your art?
Yeah, that artist statement is a bit poetic.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit more straightforward at the end as just a description of what I'm doing. But in the beginning, I'm trying to um, kind of triangulate all of these different feelings through images that I'm writing. And the Neanderthal thing is so I'm thinking about the weight of being alive, the weight of the material world
Mhm.
kind of pressing down on us. And that's tying back into that idea of the crawl space, also the pressure of this subterranean layer, um, and the pressure of needing to bend over to navigate it. And I think, oh, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
About the 23andMe
Right.
results.
Yes. Yeah.
About
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So um, I'm always trying to understand, or something that I've particularly been interested in lately, is this tension between the genetic and the cultural. Just sort of like going back in my recent personal history, I've had some family health issues. My mom got very sick, and then facing my own aging in an attempt to conceive, and dealing with quite a long period of infertility as I get a little bit older. First confronting this weird, intense realization that I wanted to have children, and then confronting the biological reality of there being a a narrow range of possibility in terms of whether that's biologically feasible for your age. Um, Having always believed that was perhaps a bit of a myth, and finding out how real that is. And so in some ways, I live in this fine arts culture and academia, and we think a lot about gender as performance, or the relative how relative, and we think about theoretical um, ways of making meaning, and how we can deconstruct images to make meaning. And all of this relativism, I think, is sometimes at odds with things that start to feel like biological uh, biological boundaries or realities that get bumped up against. I'm sort of very wary of biological essentialism or determinism, but at the same time, there seems to be some irrefutable facts that have been particularly confounding to me lately. I mean, death is one of them, but before that, we come across all of these points of aging that remind us of our animalhood, of the fact that we're just like creatures. Um, but we have these really big brains, so we can live outside of that reality, and we can almost pretend that we are separate from that narrative. And I've had to confront recently how woven into just the life and death and dirt of being alive I am. And yeah, so I think the 23andMe thing, just, to get back to that, it's being told by this company that my genes are giving me a particular personality trait, which there is some truth to. Your genetic information. They've been able to tie depression and OCD and some of these other neurodivergencies to genetic markers. And apparently, your amount of Neanderthal DNA or Neanderthal can be related to a propensity to having possessions, which I find to be bizarre and
Yeah.
funny and all of these things. But yeah, it's just trying to figure out, what does that really mean? Can we really just read our genes like a map that tell us who we are and what we'll do? Is it really that predetermined?
All right. So we come back to that nurture versus nature
Yeah.
discussion. Yeah. That's interesting. Because you did and then go on to saying that had something to do with the trait of trouble discarding rarely used possessions, or was it just possessions in general for that?
Yeah,
But
I mean, it specifically says rarely used possessions, which I think is an amazingly specific.
yeah.
How uh, how narrowly that points to a kind of object, and essentially says tendency towards hoarding.
Uh-huh.
And that these things are that you're torn, you can't get rid of them, which implies a kind of like emotional attachment, which is very much what some of this work is about. These garments, particularly that I'm printing from, are uh, they're emotionally loaded for me, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. I've talked in other artist statements about how some of it is, this idea of getting rid of things that don't cause you joy. I They don't necessarily cause me joy. These things that I feel like I have to hold on to that maybe belong to a deceased loved one. Um, I don't feel like I can let go of them because they become a surrogate for that person. And even though logically I know they are not that person, it's hard to let that bit of them go. Um, yeah, so it's it's very related. I mean, I think it's interestingly related to uh, my process of finding or keeping objects that have importance to me, and then utilizing them in my art to talk about our relationship to materials, and um, yeah, our need to kind of like hold things and cover ourselves.
So you have these garments, and um, you ink them, correct? For the
Yeah.
printmaking process, right? So they become something different. It's no longer the delicate, fragile slip. It becomes, I would assume, encrusted with the ink, or if not encrusted, stained and whatever. Do you still hold on to these objects after that, or has you now created a new object from it and you're able to let it go?
Yeah, I think the idea, what I've said and still maybe believe, is that the idea of printing them is to make this record where I can see the object again in a new way, um, see it in this omnipotent, almost X-ray way where I understand it again, um, anew. But the thing that I've printed, like you said, is then covered in ink, and I do think of it as an act of both creation and destruction simultaneously. And the point being that I could then let go of the thing I've made this record of, that I could release the idea that the person, and discard of it. However, I've yet to actually throw any of them away because now they've become the matrix. And there is, of course, this part of me that thinks I may need to revisit them as a matrix.
Yeah.
But that is the idea. It's transferring the importance or the uh, feeling of emotional loading from the object itself onto the print.
Mhm. Yeah. So I hoard old family photographs, but not just from like my childhood, but my parents' childhood, and then anything they've also been able to pass down from other family members
Yeah,
and make paintings right from these.
yeah,
And they don't doesn't destroy the photograph in the process though. But I still don't let go of the photographs. Like I have shoe boxes and shoe boxes full
yeah,
and envelopes and whatever else full of photographs. So I understand the need to hold. And they're not like in frames up around my house where I'm just like seeing them all the time, but I have to keep them in these boxes that I can go
yeah,
through. And yeah.
yeah.
And
And
when I
those
work with
boxes.
yeah, I was gonna say, and then when I'm working with one, it's like a conversation with the person who is no longer there to have a conversation with. So, bring up memories and talking. It could be just wall painting, talking with them about what's going on now or things that wasn't said. Or sometimes, it's wondering about the person because I didn't know like a parent as a child or a grandparent or great grand, whichever great grandparents. So I don't know. I can see that in your
Yeah,
work also.
yeah. And all of these things have this like real and emotional weight. The boxes that you have that you would have to
Mhm.
move if you moved. And I
Yeah.
I really do think that the intention of printing the actual objects is, I mean, there's a multiplicity around it. It's a kind of purge. There's something cathartic about it. There's also my ability to interact with that object in a way that, similar to putting it on, I can kind of think about the person inside it and what it felt like to be them and the feeling of the fabric against their skin. And then in printing it, like I said, there's this sort of um, like recording or record keeping through the prints also. But yeah, I intend for them to no longer have the importance that they had, and in some ways have failed to dispose of them, even though that is, I think, part of the concept of the gesture.
As I've already said like a million times, I absolutely love the garment and fur prints. So how did you well, I guess we kind of talked about this, but how did you first start using them? Yeah.
Yeah. So I came to this through, I mean, I have this tension between, or maybe I'm, similar to how I both love theater and visual art, sculpture, three-dimensional and two-dimensional, and particularly textiles. I'm really interested
Mhm.
in. Um, I think that I was trying to figure out ways to incorporate um, the three-dimensional or texture into work in a way that didn't feel as constructed as a drawing of two-dimensional space. And I was doing a lot of work about a woman that my mom worked for many years, a debutante, ex-mayor's wife, who had grown up in the era and performed a really high femininity during um, the atomic era. So that kind of mid-century um, iconic look of uh, 50s womanhood. And she continued to portray that, to do her best to uphold that kind of image as she aged. And there was something tragic and interesting about the way she continue to perform that very specific and rigid form of femininity. And so I was making work about her and about womanhood, different forms of different performances of what it is to be a woman, or different uh, kinds of femininity, partly as an analysis of what drew me to it, because I also have this love of high femme, um, especially, as a queer person, as a lesbian. I'm thinking about, I'm attracted to trying to figure out what you're attracted to versus what you want to become. That's one of those internal conversations. And I was given all of this woman's wigs after she passed away, and she wore identical wigs,
Wow.
which is a pretty common thing in the South, to, especially as you age, to keep from having to get your hair done all the time. And so I came into possession of all of these very identical, stereotypical blonde wigs, and later came into possession of a large a lot, basically, of nightgowns and underthings, and realized that I wanted to use these objects that came from these very real people, that I knew, to create a portrait of that person that was also a portrait of someone attempting to retain a facade or perform a kind of femininity that I was also interested in. So the project goes back quite a few years now into my really thinking about portraiture and thinking about performance of gender. So the piece that you see on the screen with the brassiere and wig, that is one of those pieces that were a little bit earlier on, where I'm first thinking about how to show a person without the person being there.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Wow.
And then I guess with the fur, as I've transitioned from this body of work that's thinking mostly about uh, gender performances into thinking about, you know, life and materiality, and my role in this cycle of life and death, which, sounds kind of maybe really broad or general, but specifically this waking up, as a child, to find yourself in a body, and then finding out that that body has an expiration date, and a society that really values the brain and the consciousness, and would kind of rather not have a body, as far as I can tell. It seems like increasingly, as we move towards AI and virtual reality, we're sort of like, ew, bodies. We have
Mm.
to constantly maintain them. And I think that has become really crystallized for me lately. So, um, and I have a really strong love of animals and deep relationship with my pets, and the realizing what is probably a somewhat obvious realization, that I'm an animal,
Yeah.
but like what that really means. I think I just started to think about the the pelts or coverings of animals, along with like the idea of a mammal, as a related to mammaries and mothering.
Hmm. Well, they are very interesting because the the print of the fur objects, they have that kind of between animal and human. Sorry. Um, so the first one I first looked, it's like, oh, it looks like, like animal, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think I was also, when my mom was going through some really scary health stuff and I was recognizing her mortality,
Mm.
I was reading um, the Grendel, um, the book by John Gardner, that's a retelling of Beowulf from the antagonist point of view. And um,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
so, I mean, they're even titled to
Mhm.
reflect that. I was really drawn into this retelling of an early hominid story. And there's been some theoretical writing, which I don't know, how based in fact this is, but some really interesting writing about theories of Brendel as being a Neanderthal, um, perhaps, that maybe Beowulf is a story of an interaction, a hominid interaction between archaic humans and Neanderthals. And so there's this sort of tie-in to thinking about otherness and ancestors that up until recently we didn't really think of as ourselves, and finding out that we really did interbreed, and that
Yeah.
these like half animal creatures or things that we think of as like Stone Age cavemen, they're part of us,
Mhm.
which brings us back towards a little closer tied into the world we think of as like nature or
Mhm.
animalia.
I think it's really interesting because you have the prints on of fabric garments on paper, and then you have also prints of garments on a cotton fabric piece, and then you have stitching, the sewing back into on paper, and I love how that's all interrelated. It's really kind of interesting when how did you decide, or what led to even going back into sewing into the paper onto the garments?
Yeah, I think it's all about trying to confuse the materiality of it, like trying to mix up what it appears to be, and giving you a sense of. I want to recall for people what it's like to hold a garment, a knit item, an object maybe that is related to a maternal figure or somebody that they knew in their life that, I don't know, like the sort of like what is you find somebody a sock from a sock drawer or something, and the experience of that object. So I think it's trying to recall a phenomenological or a textural, like textural experience, through visual signaling, where I'm using things like actual thread, to point out how the garment that I'm referring to or portraying was made, to give a kind of like physical or embodied sense of what that garment is, as a way of tying into other people's memories of those kinds of things, because we all have interactions with those kinds of objects. Even if you don't have an interaction with, like a lot of the behind you there next to the stockings is one of the house dresses. And even if your grandmother didn't wear house dresses just like this, you probably have had interaction with your mother's, the kind of clothing your mother wore around the house to just get things done, to take care of chores. So I'm trying to evoke that kind of memory connection, to people's personal experiences with textiles and objects that uh, bring them back to early memories, or um, connect them back to their own uh, sort of childhood and feelings of home, and their relationship to their mothers.
Oh, awesome. So you talked about the wigs. So I'm now assuming these are based off of wigs that you received from um, the Southern woman, well,
Yes.
the Southern lady,
Hmm.
the Belle.
Yes.
So how did you come to working in ceramics though? Why did you make them out of clay?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one on the left of the screen here, the one called Pin Curl, is more based on those wigs, which were all very short and, a kind of like 1950s blonde do. So that one is very, and that's where I started with the ceramic wigs. So it was going from the real wig and working. I've done other things with those wigs. I've made sculptures from them as well as prints, and then wanting to play with the idea of a wig or wigness, as an icon, as kind of an image. Um, and the deeper I got into it, I was sort of like, what is it about wigs as a thing? And I realized that they're the ultimate accessory, the ultimate signal of identity, and the quickest way to totally transform identity. And they also are hyper feminine objects in a lot of cases, particularly the kinds of wigs that I was looking at for these pieces, which were more coming from drag wigs and wigs that reference that heightened femininity of the 1950s and mid-century. But why ceramic? Partly it was just opportunity. I was at a residency and I had the opportunity to play with a new material, and I love materials. I love, touching things and crafting, and there was a joy in discovering a new material that I hadn't had I'd always wanted to play with, and having that joy inserted back into, when you have a process that you've done for a really long time, it can become artwork is work, but it can become rote, and you can start to see the lack of joy in the making in the work. And I wanted to have beginner's mind again and sort of try to reinvigorate. So exploring ceramics was partly just a creative, joyful act, and a opportunity that was provided by a residency that I did in Springfield, Illinois, through the art association there. But I also really liked how, it has the ability to be so rigidly shiny in a way that reminds me of how those that kind of high femme iconic imagery operates. There's a real rigidity there. And vitreous ceramic, will outlast us. The element of time is really interesting to me because I'm always thinking about my body in relationship to time, and these ceramics is something that doesn't go away.
Right.
And then I wanted to make them wearable, and they technically are. It would require a little bit of endurance to put this on your head because they're heavy. And admittedly, I think they're a little bit, from a fine ceramics standpoint, there's a little bit of naivete there that I enjoy, because I'm allowing myself, like I said, to play in a way that I don't with or haven't before. So I think that it's partly what the material does, the aesthetics of it, the properties of that rigid shininess, and how that can become a kind of cartoon. And I'm really thinking about the iconography or simplified image of this 1950s kind of drag adjacent type of femininity.
Yeah, interesting. Do you ever wear wigs?
I did a lot more performance. I haven't done a little bit of performance in a while because I've been focusing on this body of work. But prior to this, I've done quite a few performance pieces, and often those incorporate wigs. I don't wear them on a regular basis currently, although I could totally see myself going the way of the woman who that collection of real wigs came from. It makes a lot of sense, to just have a day wig. I love that as an idea. I think it makes total sense, and is a part of many people's lives. So it's not always a high key, high performance object. It can very much just be utilitarian. But for the kinds of wigs I'm thinking of, they are more associated, I think, with performance and cosplay. So yeah, in my performance work, I have worn wigs.
Because I love wigs, so I was just kind of curious. I don't wear them all the time because it takes a lot of effort to get it right, and I'm not but so it's not as successful, but it's so wonderful because you can just like put on one and you are someone else for the day. I suddenly have
Exactly.
long blonde hair, or short. So but I remember growing up, going through my mom's drawers and things, that she had a couple of short bobs. And when she was, I guess, in her 20s, so somewhere late 60s, early 70s or 70s, maybe it was in the 70s. I guess she had really long straight blonde hair, but would pull it up and then have like the short blonde bob wig for something different. I don't know. That always kind of fascinated me. Just the um,
Yeah,
just
no,
yeah.
totally. I mean, it really is like, I think it's a quick way to talk about identity because
Mhm.
you can change it instantly. It's totally transforming in a way that almost no other accessory is. And it gives you a kind an agency over your identity that I think is really satisfying and seductive.
Mhm. Yeah. I wondered if you could tell me about Junk Drawer, the quilt. I understand this is one of the newest works in this collection that we have here. And I was kind of curious, if you, well, one, generally about it, but also if you printed directly on the fabric these objects, or what you would like to share.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, there's actually quite a lot of newer work in the show. The Grindle pieces, the fur pieces are super new. Um,
Mm.
the junk drawer quilt is newly finished. I started this during the pandemic, so it really is my pandemic quilt. I think there's,
Oh,
many of us
interesting.
that have a
Yeah.
similar either art project or craft project. It's kind of my sourdough bread, you know? Um, so, and it took me way longer than I expected it to take me. Like many things you don't know. I've done quilting before, but on a like baby quilt scale,
Mm.
and had never attempted a full sized art quilt. Um, as far as the printing goes, it is building on this wanting to use real things as a matrix. And so the objects are all objects that came from my own junk drawer. Again, thinking about this weight of stuff that you have around, and what the heck do you do with it? Um, the junk drawer in our house is it's so valuable. I hate it because I open it and it's like looking inside the chaos of my own brain. You know,
Mm.
like it is just this chaos that seems insurmountable because I don't know where these things should go. I don't know how to deal with them. I don't know how to get rid of them or even if I should get rid of them, and I don't always know what they are, like you don't necessarily know what's even in there. Um, so I took out the stuff from our junk drawer and I documented it through photography because I knew that these are very much three-dimensional things like pliers. So I took a
Mhm.
picture of it and then made laser cut, like made files and laser cut out each of the objects so that there's this corresponding block or matrix to each object, which you can see in the have been painted pink on the left there. They were printed from things that are very much
Oh,
like the pink objects.
okay.
Yeah. So each one became its own little block or matrix. And then they were relief printed on a little letterpress, a little mobile letterpress that I was able to take to a residency. I had a residency at Gary, Indiana, the Calumet residency, and they were really gracious and allowed me to create a print studio in their space there. And again, this was during the pandemic. I was all by myself and I just
Wow.
printed all of these objects and I printed them directly on fabric onto fabric that had either been screen printed or uh, monotyped or collagraph printed. All of the printing, all of the imagery, all of the pattern is all hand done here. So I had,
Okay.
yeah, brought all of these quilt squares with me that had imagery on them, and then printed the relief block junk quilt stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, and I love the part that trails around because we were able to bring it around the wall to the front and
Yeah.
make it still part of the space. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was thinking about it as like a drawer, as these quilt blocks becoming compartments of the drawer, and also thinking about the
Mm.
experience of pulling out a drawer and only being able to see some of it. And then
Mhm.
wanted to kind of deconstruct and play with the quilt as a medium, and what is it like if the quilt is making itself or unmaking itself.
Mm. Yeah. Right, because even a junk drawer is constantly changing, the objects
Hmm.
that are being, dropped in or, used at a time or another. Oh.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
So, I'm curious, why did you choose to print monotypes rather than editioning the prints?
Yeah, and I don't know if these are collagraphs or monotypes or relief monotypes or relief collagraphs. I've had, gone through trying to figure out what to call these things. Um, I'm excited about this body of work because it's pulling back in more drawing. I'm drawing these creatures and then cutting out basically pattern pieces that then get fit together and printed from. And I mean, part of it is that process. I want to create. I think it's wanting to create not just a illusion of space or a depiction of an illusion of space, but to capture a real thing. Like how do you make the print be the real thing instead of a reflection of the thing? So thinking of each print as the creature itself instead of a depiction of the creature, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The Matrix is like a for me it's like putting together pieces of a puzzle that create the creature that comes to life when it hits the paper.
Mm. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and editioning, it's less and less interesting to me. I think
Mhm.
I'm just not that kind of printmaker. My partner very much is that kind more traditionally based, uh, creating an edition. And I participate in portfolios and sometimes create editions through there, which is a valuable thing. But I think that this work is not necessarily about the multiple or dissemination or the ability to make a thing over and over again. Instead, it's attempting to be the thing. And I think that's
Yeah.
what
Oh, yeah, that's actually rather poetic in a way. Yeah. Huh.
well, I'm glad. Good.
Yeah, I
We're always
like
aiming
that.
for that, right? Try to
I know,
yeah.
right? Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm excited about these. I think this is probably a direction that I've just started exploring.
Okay, so I guess that leads me to what is next? I mean, so you said that the Grendel creatures are sort of the newest or very new. Are you working on additional prints on that direction, or do you have something else you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean both. I'm working with a collaborator friend, Sage Parrot, on a work installation that will go up in just like a week. Yeah, it's very soon in Art Space in Raleigh, North Carolina, and so I'm excited about that. And that's a kind of an offshoot, a different body of work. We're really thinking about the party as or a party that you maybe showed up too late for or missed as a metaphor for the pandemic and late stage capitalism and just sort of what it feels like to be alive right now, especially in the last couple of years. And so we've teamed up together and taken my material approach, my installation and 3D way of dealing with printmaking, and mash that together with her Hey Peep characters, these really graphic characters that she's known for. And so that's exciting. I'm excited to see all that come together because I've been working on that for the last 6 months and also preparing for this exhibition. But I think in terms of just my own studio project, I think with upcoming shows in the summer, I'm going to continue definitely working with the fur and pelt pieces and playing with these creatures, making them smaller scale. These are giant, and at least for prints. And I would love
Yeah.
to make some that are a little bit, yeah, that are smaller in a way that allows me to be a little more flexible with what they look like and how they can be. Maybe some portraits of creatures. Yeah,
Yes.
so I just cannot wait until I have
Ah,
free time to play with that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And you just said like portraits, and I'm like, oh, I can see them even trying on the beehive wig. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
Oh, well, I will have to keep an eye on your Instagram so I can see these as you
yeah,
make them.
definitely.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I have to say thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And again, I so appreciate you sharing your work with Buckham Gallery and our Flint audience and our extended virtual audience. So this has been really lovely, Gwen. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm really impressed with the gallery, all the organization, and the way the installation went up. I love it. It really is a keeping with the work. And yeah, you have a fabulous organization. I'm so thankful for you and for existing in Flint.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much again to Gwen for taking time and chatting with me today, and to all of you for watching our videos and participating in Buckham's programming. Thank you.